Welcome. So glad you're here. My name's Carlos. I'm one of the pastors here at Gateway. And if you're in the room, will you let everybody else know that you're here in person? Come on, let them hear you. It's good to hear you worship and do what you do and creating space for everybody to feel comfortable here. It's been fun to see you guys here. If you're watching online, we're so glad you're joining us. Some of you are watching from a campus. Maybe you're out on vacation and we love you that you have already done that. No shame in taking a vacation, I promise. I'm taking one this summer. It's gonna be great. I flew back a few days ago and I was at the airport and for the last year, there's nobody there. Now all the parking is gone. So everybody's ready to kind of get their vacation on and get out and do what they do. But I'm so glad you're with us. I really am. We're jumping into this new series. And I like giving you guys inner workings of how things work. So what we do is we write a brief. And one of the pastors, either John or myself or Eric Bryant, who's at South, will write a brief. And the brief really kind of guides us through the whole series, and then different people might speak the brief. So I wrote the brief for this one based out of what we were seeing happening here at Gateway. Not our culture, just our people, not what's happening in the news, not what's happening here and there, literally our people at North, South, Central, whatever campus you call home. And what we found was this 5-letter word that was elusive, this word that really challenged people, and it's a word that's right in the title. It's the word trust. And we're finding that as we were having conversations with people trying to get their lives back to whatever normal looks like, that there were trust issues that were rising up. And really, they weren't really rising up. If we're being honest, these issues were there the whole time. They were there before the pandemic. But the pandemic and how people responded, how the church responded, how the city, state, CDC, your family, the presidential election, like all these things just kind of gaslit people on what was already an issue for many people, and it's issue of trust, because this trust is hard to come by, right? And trust is something that people want you to give them. They want to gain your heart. They want to gain your business. They want to gain your vote if you're voting. This is trust, and people look at you and say, just trust me. Just trust me. And they do commercials about it, and they do billboards about it. And matter of fact, this wasn't in my notes. I did an interview with Harvard University a few weeks ago. And they were talking to pastors about the pandemic and religion, and so I did this 2-hour interview with these researchers out of Harvard, and man, they asked me a question, and they said, how do you feel the intersect with church and politics is going? What's a loaded question, right? Like, where do I start? And I gave some context of us at Gateway, that we have people we're literally 50-50 as a church. We have 50% of our people are on one side, 50% on the other, and the rest of us try to keep our sanity, and we just haven't claimed a side, right? And that's fine. And I said, let me tell you the frustration. The frustration is politicians, people in culture and society, what they do is they get you to trust them in a micro way. They knock on your door, they give you phone calls, they personally text you, they do all these things. And then when you give them your trust, they now want to lead you in a macro way, and they forget who you are. And I said, people on all fronts, I get frustrated by that, because you tug on our heart and then you stomp on it when it benefits you. And they were quiet on the other side. They thought I was gonna pick a side. They thought I was gonna be pro this or pro that. And I said, listen, it's a game of cat and mouse. It's elusive, this thing we're calling trust. But we're asking you for this week and the 3 weeks coming to trust us. To trust us with walking you through the journey of what trust looks like for you. We're gonna ask you a lot of questions, but they're questions we're asking ourselves. We're gonna ask you to do some deep work of where does this stuff come from, but we're doing the work with you, because I want you to know this isn't an easy task. And I'm going to ask you a question that was asked in the early 90s by Aladdin to Jasmine. Do you trust me? We're going to take you on a magic ride, right? And over the next few weeks, there might be some difficult things we talk about, but it's okay. It's good for us. Just trust us that we are going to keep Scripture and who God is at the center of what we do as we challenge each other. Now, we were planning for this series. We knew this was coming up. There's a lot of research pre-pandemic just about trust issues. And really, every generation is different. Like, I'm Gen X. I'm Gen X generation, and we were told that we were worth nothing. So we said, forget all of you. We're just going to do our own thing, boomer. And the boomers just we're one of the biggest generations, and Gen Xers, nobody wanted us. We're the smallest generation in the history of the United States. We're latchkey kids. Thank you for helping me preach the message. And they left us to our own devices, literally left us. And so we're like, we're going to show you. You didn't want to have kids because you wanted to save money. You know what we're going to do? We're going to have a bunch of kids and we're just going to milk you dry with grandchildren. And that's what we've done. We have a bunch of kids. I'm doing my part as a Gen Xer, right? 5 kids. But every generation is different, and really every generation has a different way of seeing how the country and society and how things should work. But this generation is different because they're equipped with social media. They're equipped with this tool that changes countries, that causes revolutions. And they're saying, you know what? Sorry, Boomer. Sorry, Gen X and Millennials. You're going to join us pretty soon. And they're like, no more status quo. We've got to bring change. And then it causes us to have anxiety. Do we trust the younger generation? And then there's all these things happening within families and companies, and all these things take place. But really, before the pandemic, Pew Research did some research, and here were some of the findings. 71% of young adults felt that people will take advantage of them if they get the chance. We had already created a culture and a society to be defensive, to have a defensive posture, that there is no more such thing called socialized trust. This idea and this notion, when you go out in the world, people are going to do and make decisions for the greater good. That is eroded. That is gone. And it affects people in a really deep way. And I was doing some research, and I read from this journalist. His name is David Brooks. He says this: we're living in the age of that disappointment. The millennials and members of Gen Z have grown up in the age of the disappointment, knowing nothing else. And in the US and elsewhere, this has produced a crisis of faith across society, but especially among the young. It has produced a crisis of trust. So I can keep telling you about it. I have websites with all sorts of statistics and all sorts of information, but we decided to kind of make it more real and normal, and our creative team hit the streets of Austin to ask people about trust. Watch this video with us.
I got a couple questions about trust for you. Who do you trust most in life?
My wife.
That was a good answer. She's gonna be happy with that.
It's funny, we were just talking about this. Probably my father. He's always been the problem solver and the solution bringer when things started to feel like they were falling apart.
Is there anybody you don't trust?
I never thought about that.
What would you say would make somebody trustworthy or not trustworthy?
Money. How they acquire it and why.
When I say the word trust, what do you think of?
This underlying faith that things aren't going to shake you up too bad.
And then what do you think of like politicians? Are they trustworthy?
For the most part, no.
So when I look at politicians, you're a human being, even if you're president of the United States or mayor of a city, or tell the things that you made a mistake on and how you learn from it, how you're not going to repeat it, but don't tell me all the great things you're doing, because it's not true. There's no way with this many decisions you could make 100% right. It's impossible.
Yeah, I really appreciate politicians that just keep going for what they believe is truth and don't shift along the way.
Do you trust the church?
Yes.
Why?
The church is the oldest form of uplifting people and reaching for that higher power to overcome challenges.
Do you think the church is a trustworthy institution?
I mean, mega churches, definitely not. Quaker groups, yes. Along those lines, those are two extremes.
I think for pastors, it's telling the truth in love. Not everybody wants to hear the truth, and sometimes it's hard to say the truth, but if you believe, you have to stick to the truth, but you have to do it in a way that brings peace to people and doesn't feel like condemnation.
Do you trust God?
Of course.
Yeah.
I'm a runner, and that's what I normally tap into when I feel like I need to stop. I just, look up, because once you have that attention mindset to look up and ask for help, it comes to you in your time of need, so to speak.
Gosh, that's a hard one. I think you have to really sink into the idea that he doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, forever. Some of the topics seem different today than in that day, but he doesn't change. And if you can get rooted in that, even though scenarios change and you might not always know exactly how to interpret the scenario in light of what he said, that you just have to know he doesn't change. And that does bring me a lot of comfort.
So here's what's funny about those interviews. If you'll notice, there's only 4 people in the video. You wanna know why? Normally we would do this and we'd have dozens of people talk to us. Nobody wanted to talk. That's all we got. It wasn't like we had 25 people and narrowed it down to 4. Because we were seeing in real time the lack of trust. In real time. And I gotta be honest with you, I think coming back from some of this, I'm like, I totally get it. I don't trust some of you yahoos driving on the road. I think you forgot how to drive over the last 15 months. I'm like, did you forget how to use a turn signal? I have seen more people go the wrong way on the street. I'm like, did you lose your sense of just your senses in general? Why are there more, what just happened? And so I understand. And yet, how are we informed by Scripture? How are we informed by how God talks and frames this conversation of trust? And that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go to Scripture. We're gonna dive into Jeremiah 17. And it's pretty heavy stuff, but it's okay. It's honest and straightforward. So we'll start in verse 5. First word, cursed. Yeah, this is gonna be nice. Cursed is the one who trusts in humans or man, who draws strength from mere flesh and whose heart turns away from the Lord. And so this curse, to stick with the Aladdin theme, is not Jafar placing some magical curse over you because you trusted a human being. No, curse contextually is basically saying you get what you get because you stepped out of line for what God wanted. It would be the same with you if you have children or you have an employee and you give them boundaries or you give them a budget and then they take that budget, but instead of doing what you agreed upon, they take it upon themselves to change things up. They find themselves in a problem and then they look at you like it was your fault. Somebody thought that was really funny in the room. Right? And they're looking at you like it's your fault. And you're looking at them saying, hold on, I gave you that budget for the project and you decided to go a different route. That is on you and you have to own that. Or maybe with your children, you gave them money for that prom dress. But Dad, I really want that prom dress. Okay, here's $25. They're like, no, seriously, okay, here's $100. And then they decide to do something else with it, and then it's your fault that you ruined prom. I'm sure that's never happened to anybody with their children. And it's God saying, as my children, I have asked you to trust in me and not in the circumstances and in humanity itself. And when you choose to put your trust in humans, you get what you get. So cursed, that's that term. And that person will be like a bush in the wasteland. They will not see prosperity when it comes, and they will dwell in the parched places of the desert in a salt land where nobody lives. Think about that. Basically, you're saying if you put your trust in humans, at some point you probably will be disappointed, and it will feel like you're in the desert. And verse 7, but blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. And they will be, here, look at this imagery. They will be like a tree planted by the water. And because they're planted, they send out roots by the stream. And because they're by the stream, they do not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green, and it has no worries in a year of drought, and never fails to bear fruit. Look at the extremes of the imagery we have. That if you trust human structure and systems, if you put all your trust in that system, that financial system, that political system, that family system even, you're gonna be disappointed. But when you put your trust here, you will have fruit because your roots will grow. How many of you have that person in your neighborhood that always has the perfect lawn and you hate them for it? Right? And you know what? God wants you to have that lawn, but that lawn is in your soul and roots that are grown and the depth of your heart. So what do we glean from this? What are some truths that we can walk away with as we're diving into a general picture of trust? And in the weeks to come, we're gonna get very specific about our trust issues. Number one, trust is about us. Trust is about us. Jeremiah 17, as we just read it, it's written away that we get to decide what happens with trust. And we're not really taught that in our culture. You know, we are taught that others determine where we put our trust. No, we choose where to put trust, not others. How many of you have heard this phrase? Trust, but verify. Or trust is earned, not given. Or fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We're taught to have a defensive posture when it comes to trust. And I get it. I get it. I was the same way. And I am the same way. It is in my nature to be more negative and to not give people the benefit of the doubt. It's how I'm wired. And I can walk around saying, well, that's how God made me, and forget you. That's just the way God made me. And if he wanted me to be different, he should have wired me different. But we all have to grow, and we all have to learn. And so this is a quote that I read in college, and it helped me understand if I'm gonna grow in trust. It's Ernest Hemingway. The best way to find out if you can trust somebody is to what? Trust them. Is to give them a measure and see what they do with it. And that's not easy. It's not easy for most of us to do this. We're gonna go to Matthew chapter 14, and it's the story of Peter and Jesus. And if you've been around church, you might know the story. If you haven't been around church, it's okay. I'm going to give you some context. So basically, Jesus had 12 disciples. He had more disciples than 12, but 12 that are recognized as disciples. And these disciples were sent out into a boat, out into the water to cross the lake or cross the water, and Jesus stayed behind. Well, while they're without Jesus, they find themselves in a storm. And they're really freaked out about what to do. And Jesus, in good Jesus fashion, decides he's gonna meet up with them, and he walks on the water towards them. Freaks them out, they think it's a ghost. And then you see this dynamic happen between Jesus and Peter. And most times when we talk about this passage, it's talked about faith, and faith has an intersect with trust. But I want you to think about the word trust as we read this passage. All right, so verse 25. So shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walk on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. And they said, Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Peter asked for it. Peter asked for it. How many times have you asked God for something and you get it and you're like, God, but why? God's like, you asked for that. Listen, I still have a 6-year-old at home. I got 2 kids in college and somehow I still have a 6-year-old. Max, what do you want for dinner? I want pizza. By the time the pizza gets done, he changed his mind. But Dad, I want peanut butter and jelly. Heck no, you're eating the pizza. I don't like pizza. You do like pizza. You said you're dying of hunger. How many got that when you were a kid? If you're dying of hunger, you'll eat what's in front of you. Well, Dad, I don't want it. And we're having this, I'm arguing with my 6-year-old again. Like, it's the bane of my existence that I am 44 years old and I spend half my time arguing with a 6-year-old. But I do it. And I'm giving him what he wants. And then Peter says in verse 20, Jesus says, come. Then Peter gets down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. He walked on the water. He was actually doing it. He was performing a miracle with Jesus. And all things are good. So verse 30, but when he saw the wind, the circumstance around him, swirling around him, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out. Now, it's easy to look at Peter and say, oh, Peter didn't have faith. Peter was the only one who got out of the boat, people. It's easy for us to be armchair quarterbacks when we read the Bible, right? It's like me. I think I maybe shared this a few years back. I love college football. Like, I love college football. I can't wait to finally go to UT. Like, to go to the games. I just love all kinds of college football. And a few years ago, my wife finally sat me down. She goes, I think after a decade and a half of being married, I got to let you know, you're the reason why I hate college football. It's okay to hit your husband or your wife next to you or your partner or whatever. And I'm like, what? Well, why? Because our weekend is determined by what a bunch of 18-year-olds with tights on do on a field. I'm like, that's not football. She goes, no. It's 18-year-olds walking around with tights on, throwing a ball to one another, and how they do determines how you treat me. And determines if you spend time with our children. So the next weekend, I didn't watch any games. It was the big Michigan-Notre Dame game. My wife says, oh, I need to go shopping. Do you want to go with me? It's always a test. Always a test. I said, yeah, I'm ready to go. Let's go shopping. She was like, really? Yeah, let's do it. End of the day, end of shopping, she's like, honey, I'm just so thankful that you did it. You never would have done this a few years ago. And I got really honest. I said, a few years ago, we didn't have TiVo. So now that we have TiVo, I can record the game. I ruined the moment. And because we do that, we are these people who want to be armchair quarterbacks, and we ruin things. And we look at the Bible, we want to judge people. We're looking at Peter. Oh, how could he sink? He had so little faith. And you have faith for every circumstance of your life? Let me tell you something. This is me just getting really raw and honest and being your pastor, right? You have issues. Yes, you. Every one of you. How I know that? Because I got issues. There's a song about that. There's a lot of songs about having issues. You have issues. It's just, are you going to be honest enough with yourself and say, where do I have issues? Where are my trust issues? What do I have to work through? And Peter, he may have been drowning, but he was the only one out there with Jesus. And then gets this. He says this. Verse 30 says this. Began to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Now, did Jesus correct him a little bit later? Oh, you have little faith, of course. But when he was drowning, did he try to swim on his own? Did he ask the other disciples for help? His trust was still in Jesus even while he was drowning. Can we say the same? Can we really say the same? Because even while he was drowning, the choice to trust was in his court. It's not some other person. It's not some outside influence. The trust and the measure of trust and the gift of trust and the commodity of trust. Trust is a commodity. It has value to it. What do you do with everything else that has value? What do you do with your home or your car or your bank account or your job? All these things that have commodities, what do? We care for it. We grow it. We share it. We receive it. This commodity of trust, are you growing it? Are you sharing it? Are you receiving more trust? It is a commodity. How are we growing it? So number one, trust is about us. Not about others. Number two, trust is what brings us strength. Jeremiah 17:5, when he's rebuking about putting your trust in people, it's like, are you waiting to get your strength from these physical humans? Is that where your strengths come from? Because trust brings us strength. Where am I expecting my strength from? Do you ever expect to have strength come from God? Psalm 121, I lift up my eyes to the hills, to the mountains, where my help comes from. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Like, do you ever have moments where you're saying, God, I'm just done. I need you. My strength comes from you. Maybe. And for some of us, maybe not. Do you have strength that comes from relationships? Because we really believe, you've heard us say it over and over, that God also surrounds us with physical relationships, people in our lives to make us better, to grow us. And I love 1 Samuel chapter 1 where David is talking to Jonathan, and David was the future king, and Jonathan was the son of the current king. And they had this bond, this tight friendship. They had this thing going on, chapter 1, and he said, Jonathan had just died. And he says, I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me, and your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. Whoa. And some of you are like, that makes me really uncomfortable. I'm gonna talk to the guys for a second. I did this in first service, I'm gonna do it again today, second service. Guys, I talk to hundreds of men every single year. And I'm gonna make a statement. And the first service, almost all of the women clapped. Not making you do that this time. But guys, I gotta tell you something. We think that women are complicated. We are more complicated. We are more complicated as human beings as men. Let me tell you why. Because God created us to have the same needs, yet we have been told that we have to shove those needs down. And that lid then complicates who we are. Because as men, when I hang out with men, you know what they want? The same things. They want to be loved, cared for. They want to have a golfing buddy. They want to have somebody they can spend time with. They want to have somebody who believes in them and sees them for who they really are, because God has wired us that way. Just like David said, he had a Jonathan that did live life with him and saw him for who he was. And I'm telling you, you have a desire inside of you that God has put there so you can draw strength from relationships, and yet you can't do that when you're isolated. That's why we push you to go to groups. That's why we want you to be surrounded by other people, because God has this way of using other people to impact you. When I met my wife, I was in college, a senior in college, and me and my buddies, I hate admitting this kind of stuff because I was 21. Let's keep that in mind. I was 21, and we had a group, and we were called the Four Horsemen, because you do that kind of thing in college when you think you're cool. And we did everything together. We played tennis, we played golf, we went skiing, we studied, we did all sorts of stuff together. And I was the first one to meet a girl. No, sorry, not a girl, the girl. We met a lot of girls, the girl. And my wife became Yoko Ono. She broke up the band. You know how she did it? She looked at me one day and she's like, your friends, they're fun to hang out with, but they're not making you better. And I need you to be better. Now my wife, if you ever met her, she's super sweet. She's meek. I think Jesus loves her more than me sometimes. It's not theologically correct, but I do sometimes. But when she's mad, she just tells you like it is. She goes, these guys are not gonna help you with our marriage. She broke up the band. A few years later, we sat down, the four of us, and we were just hanging out. Everybody had already been married by then, had kids. And the four of us sat down and had an honest male conversation. And one of the guys said, why did we waste so much of our years being superficial when we really needed something different from one another? Why did we play so much golf and do this and take trips, but we never talked about our hurts and our pains, when that's what I really needed from you guys? Because it's in us. And God strengthens us through these relationships. So trust is about us and where we invest it. Trust brings strength to us. And the last thing is trust grows confidence. Trust grows confidence. In verse 7, that's what we talked about. Jeremiah 17, verse 7 says, but blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in me. Trust grows confidence. And we grow in confidence, it grows our decision making. When we grow in confidence, it grows, it helps us gain trust from others. When we grow in confidence, It helps understand that the circumstances are what they are, and even though it seems bleak, we have trust because we're confident in our relationships. We're confident in the life that God has given us. We're confident with our life group and people we do life with. We're confident in who God is. But sometimes we need people to help us along. I shared about my college buddies and how my wife broke up the band, and I was like, what am I going to do? I don't have any guy friends anymore. And a couple years later, I met a guy who changed my life. His name was Chris. And I've shared before that as a kid, I was a victim of sexual abuse. There were two men who took advantage of me when I was a kid at different times, and it caused me not to trust people in general, much less grow some male friendships. And yeah, I played sports and did all that, but it was all superficial. And here I am now. I'm 26 years old, and I'm broken, and our marriage is about to be over. We had just been married a couple of years, and I didn't know how to work through my sexual dysfunction. I didn't know how to work through the abuse. I didn't know how to work through any of that stuff. And my poor wife, beautiful wife, took the brunt of that. And God brought somebody into my life. His name is Chris. And Chris kind of chased down our friendship. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be the cool kid. Like, I was the kid who walked around, didn't need anybody, and people wanted to be my friend, right? Because I was the captain of the sports team, and I was senior class president, and I did this, and I did that, and I dated so-and-so, and I lived my life in this very superficial way, and some of us do that sometimes. I get married. I married Libby, who's very realistic, and she's like, yeah, well, you got to get some good friends. And Chris came along, and finally, it got kind of weird because he was like wanting to be my friend. Like, he was needy. Nobody wants a needy friend. Right? When are we gonna hang out? I'm like, dude, chill out. Like, whenever. I don't know. I kept him at bay. Like, he's just a weird guy. And finally, my wife's like, maybe we should hang out with him. And I did. And for the next few years, Chris's friendship and what God used Chris to do changed my life. To the point that we even got matching tattoos. I never would have done something like that because I'm independent. I don't need anybody. And Chris was like, let's get tattoos, man. I'm like, dude, I'm not gonna do that. Like, I'm not a third grade little girl with pigtails. Like, we don't need to do that. We don't need to. And my wife sat me down one day and she goes, do you want the tattoo? I was like, yeah, I'd like to get a tattoo. Go get it. Nah, I don't know. My wife made me get a tattoo. How many of you can say your wife made you do that? Because she knew there was a healing thing happening in me. And that God was healing me on one side, and he was using some friendships to heal me on the other. And she needed me to be whole if I was going to help lead our family and lead our children. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions that I ask myself. And sometimes the answers change with time. I'm going to ask them in first person because I want you to ask yourself these questions. Where have I been burned? Let's be honest with yourself. Where have I been burned? Number two, what grudges am I currently holding? What grudges am I currently holding? And why, at the heart of the matter, do I struggle with trust? Because the thing is, the answers to these questions actually erode confidence, the confidence we're talking about. It erodes it. And when your confidence erodes, you have to build it back up. And fortunately, as your pastor, I have had years of building confidence and building trust relationships. I can say that I have healed from so many things that happened in my life. I can talk about the abuse that I faced. I can talk about drug abuse. I can talk about my alcoholism. I can talk about all those things because they don't dictate my life anymore. And I'm free, and my trust and my confidence has grown so much so that when things come my way, it's like, it's fine. We're gonna be fine. I got my wife, got my kids, got my friends, got my church. We're gonna be good. We're gonna be good. And then sometimes you get a phone call that challenges you, or you get a piece of news. And Tuesday, I love our church and I love what we're doing, love our mission. I was out with Charles, one of our executive pastors, and we were doing business on behalf of Gateway with the missions partner. And we landed at our layover, and I get a call from my wife that my brother died. And okay, what's going on? What happened? He's 41, got 3 kids, and I just start going and I go to my unhealthy place, which is control and not trust. And I'm like, oh, well, okay, so I can get there at this point, but I gotta do this for the church, and I gotta do this, and I gotta make this phone call. And I'm like, I'm already strategizing how I am gonna control the situation. And my wife said, no, you're gonna keep going to where you're going, and when you land there, I'm like, no, you're gonna keep going. And I did, and I was away from my family for a day and a half, and my wife was like, it's fine, you're gonna stay away, you need to get your head right. Told the staff here at Gateway, and guess what happened to those jokers? Nobody called me all week. They didn't need me. And I had to wrestle with my solitude. Because my family was taking care of things. My church family was taking care of things. And I had to ask the question, okay, God, do I trust you? I don't have any work to do because everybody took it off my plate. I don't have a funeral to plan because everybody took it off my plate. And now it's just me and this mourning and all these things. And yet, I've done the work to trust and to grow my confidence. So when I have those moments, that it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to have moments where you just kind of just get down. And you say, okay, God, like I have nothing to offer you right now. Like I don't even know if I trust the situation. Like all my unhealthy old things are coming up and like, okay, God, I wish I could say I was a stoic pastor who led through it. No, and it's like, God, all I have is like these empty hands because I'm in this city I don't live in. Fortunately, I had my friend with me, Charles, but and I'm in the hotel room because I can't even go to our meetings. And Charles is running everything. Everybody's running everything and giving me space, but I don't want the space. I want the distraction. I want the distraction of running a funeral, taking care of my nieces and nephews, running the business of Gateway Church. And everybody's stripped it away, and it's me and Jesus. And I'm just like, okay, I got nothing. Yet when I have nothing, I have everything if I have you. And for some of us, you might say, I don't even have trust. I've got mistrust. That might be the biggest gift you can give God, is your lack of trust. Because just the idea of giving it, it's like your kid giving you that stupid note they made at school that you can't even read. But just the fact that they gave it to you meant they were thinking about you. Can we trust? Can we begin to do the work of tilling our heart for maybe what God could do in us in the weeks to come? Here's what we're going to do right now. We normally sing songs and we ask you to sing with us. What we're asking you to do right now is to stay seated, get comfortable wherever you're at, and let us do the singing. Let us do the leading. At the end of the song, if you want to sing, that's great. And I want you to listen to these words because our trust, our great hope is in Jesus. That is where we thrive. So let us sing this song over you. We love you. God bless you.